What did the most dangerous criminal in history do? How far can revenge, lust for money, and fame take a person? And how are the most ruthless criminals in the world kept? Watch this episode to find out. Let's go. In 2006, Pedro Alonso Lopez was listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most dangerous criminal in history. The man, by his own admission, killed more than 300 people in 3 countries. Pedro Alonso Lopez was born in 1948 into a very dysfunctional family. The boy had 12 brothers and sisters, but only his mother was raising them. Pedro's childhood, by his own admission, was terrible. When his mother kicked him out of the house, he was almost immediately kidnapped by a maniac. When Lopez managed to escape, he was taken in by an older American couple. Pedro then began attending a school for orphans, but it was there at the age of 12 that he again became a victim of brutal abuse. Pedro spent the next 6 years of his life begging for alms, committing petty theft, and stealing cars. Upon reaching adulthood, Pedro found the maniac who had held him captive as a child and brutally avenged him. A post-murder court found the offender's past relationship with the victim to be a mitigating factor, and Lopez was sent to a prison for 8 years. After his release, Pedro moved to Peru, where he continued his brutal hunt. He later told the police that by 1978, he had about 100 victims on his list. He was apprehended in Ecuador, where one of his victims escaped to there and reported him to the police. After his rearrest, Lopez received a big sentence of 16 years. But after 14 years in jail, he was secretly transferred to a psychiatric hospital in Colombia. In an interview from his prison cell, Lopez described himself as the man of the century and said he was being released for good behavior. However, the authorities clearly did not intend to grant freedom to such a dangerous criminal. In August 1994, Lopez was released from an Ecuadorian prison, but almost immediately arrested again as an illegal immigrant. Soon he was turned over to Colombian authorities, who accused him of a 20-year-old murder. He was declared insane and placed in the psychiatric ward of the Bogota hospital. In 1998, he was declared sane and released on $50 bail, subject to certain conditions. He later went into hiding. A documentary made by British journalists about the life of the criminal mentioned that Interpol had issued a report of a re-arrest by Colombian authorities in connection with a murder that took place in 2002. Information about Lopez is currently scarce. As of 2020, his whereabouts are unknown. The most dangerous criminal in Britain. Many people recognize Charles Bronson as Britain's most dangerous and violent criminal, but some disagree. They believe that Britain's most dangerous criminal is Robert Maudsley, known as the Brain Eater. There's some logic in that. The history of this man is not at all simple. Psychologists are trying to understand many nuances of Maudsley's biography until now. Little's known about his childhood, but it clearly wasn't a happy one. At the age of 6, Robert and his siblings were taken away from his parents, accused of abuse. Social service workers were shocked. Robert suffered the most. He was especially disliked by his cruel father. Once the boy was locked in a room for 6 months. His father opened the door only to slip in some food and water. However, after a while, the father of the family changed his strategy. Robert was once again transferred to social services, and he began his life in foster homes. Before reaching adulthood, he changed them more than once or twice. As a teenager, Robert left Liverpool, but what happened to him in that city changed his psyche forever. The capital of Great Britain did not bring significant changes in the life of Maudsley. On the streets of London, he was a petty criminal and could barely make ends meet. After several attempts to commit suicide, Robert was forced to get psychiatric help and spent a considerable amount of time in hospitals. However, therapy didn't help. Maudsley committed his first murder in 1974. An ordinary worker showed Robert pictures of children. The stories of these children's abuse reminded Robert of his own childhood and became a trigger for the aggression. Shortly after the crime, Robert was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. At the same time, the man himself was convinced that he had done the right thing and that society should be grateful to him for getting rid of the monsters. Robert was placed in Broadmoor Hospital, where many famous criminals have served their sentences. It was here in 1977 that Maudsley committed another murder. The motive again turned out to be a personal hatred against people who harm children. It was such a criminal who became Maudsley's new victim. Crime committed within the walls of the hospital was found to be an intentional act which characterized Robert not as a mentally unwell man, but as a true criminal. After the murder, the decision was made to transfer him to another facility, Wakefield Prison. Robert didn't like it in prison. He repeatedly stated that he wanted to return to Broadmoor Hospital. One night in 1978, Maudsley committed 2 more murders, after which he surrendered to prison guards. After these events, Maudsley was deemed too dangerous to be kept with other criminals. He was assigned solitary confinement, where he remains to this day. In most cases, the criminals recognized as the most dangerous in the world have indeed done terrible things. However, among the celebrities of police reports are those who have not spilled even a single drop of blood. Stay tuned to learn about the world's most unusual, mysterious, and dexterous lawbreakers. Jesse James. Jesse James is one of the most notorious criminals in the United States. Many people liked him. But why? The fact is that Jesse James was often portrayed as the real Robin Hood of the American Wild West in works of fiction of the time. James and his accomplices engaged in robbery, attacking northern federal banks and trains of federal companies, sending all stolen money to the poor people. This selectivity was due to the fact that James was a staunch Confederate and committed most of his crimes in retaliation for the defeat of the Southern states in the Civil War. However, there's another point of view in the country. Many believe that the exploits of Jesse James, embellished by journalists, were just gangsterism. One way or another, James' life ended early at age 34. The bandit was killed by his own accomplice, who hoped to receive a reward from the government promised for the legendary robber's head. Jean-Bernard Lesnaud. For many people, it's not those people who successfully evade the law who seem particularly mysterious, but those who continue to commit crimes in plain sight for years. Jean-Bernard Lesnaud is one of the latter. The famous arms dealer was born in France, where he began to be wanted for arms trade back in the 1980s. Lesnaud managed to escape justice, but reappeared in Florida, where he continued to do business without leaving his luxurious villa. Surprisingly, Lesnaud didn't hide from anyone in America. He agreed to phone interviews with journalists and even started his own website, where anyone who had money could buy a fighter jet or a machine gun. He sold everything: tanks, airplanes, field hospitals, and so on. It was only in 2002 in Switzerland that police officers were able to arrest the cheeky man. Charles Ponzi. Surprisingly, it doesn't always take a gun to become one of the world's most dangerous criminals. Charles Ponzi didn't need threats to get huge sums of money regularly. The criminal, who proudly called himself a businessman, received millions of dollars from his investors using an outwardly simple plan. The new entrepreneur registered a company in Boston called the Securities Exchange Company. The company issued promissory notes in which it pledged to pay $1,500 for every $1,000 it received in 90 days. In the spring of 1920, Ponzi handed over control of the company to 18-year-old Lucy Martelli, after which the pyramid collapsed. The depositors, of course, rushed to demand their money back, but all the accounts had already been frozen, and Ponzi himself was later declared bankrupt. Surprisingly, Charles served only 5 years for his massive, fraudulent scheme. D.B. Cooper. And perhaps the most mysterious criminal in history is still the man known by the alias D.B. Cooper. On November 24, 1971, the criminal hijacked a plane. After the plane landed in Seattle, the criminal released 36 passengers in exchange for a parachute and money brought in by the authorities. However, he took the crew members as hostages and ordered them to fly to Mexico City. Around 8 p.m., the criminal opened the rear door of the plane and jumped out. Despite a lengthy investigation, the FBI was neither able to identify the hijacker nor find out what happened to him next. The Dan Cooper crime remains the only unsolved air piracy in commercial aviation history. That's all, guys. What do you think happened to Dan Cooper? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you later.